Welcome to our discussion today, Cybersecurity Analytics and Big Data, sponsored by Cloudera. I'm your host, Jason Miller, and our guest is Eddie Garcia, the Chief Security Architect in the Office of the CTO for Cloudera. Eddie, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, let's start with the discussion that just seems to be growing and growing across the federal community. Data security, cybersecurity, are they the same thing? Are they two different things? Are they the different side of the same coin? Where do you stand?
They're more two sides to the same coin. So they really depend on each other. So you need to have a very fundamental data security in place. And you need to be able to take advantage of some of the existing best practices that we have today. And cybersecurity takes a different approach to it. So both of these disciplines combined is how you achieve greater security.
Do you think for too long we've used them as synonyms? If you're securing your data, you're also being cyber secure and vice versa. And is that why maybe private sector, public sector organizations are struggling with cybersecurity to some extent? I mean, there's a lot of reasons.
Yeah, there's to some extent there's basically a false sense of protection with data security. Just because I turned on these few things for security, therefore I'm protected, and that's not usually the case. So you need to have both of them. So the data security is having all the controls in place, and cybersecurity is more about monitoring, making sure that your data remains secure. So when they depend on each other.
I think that's interesting, the false sense of security. I think that's very well done, because for so many years, let's just talk about the government for a second. Where is the focus from the Office of Management and Budget been? In many ways, they've been using cybersecurity, data security as synonyms, and you've seen, well, you got to encrypt your data at rest. You have to encrypt your data at transit. You have to use two-factor authentication to protect your data. And only recently do I feel like they've really come around to saying, let's make sure we're doing both sides of the same coin. I mean, do you get that sense that there was a focus on of data security too much in the early part, and things are coming around?
So it was necessary to focus on the initial part. The problem was that we also needed to focus on the cybersecurity part, and I think we're coming around, and this is what we're going to be able to do with new technologies like with big data, is to be able to take advantage of these new insights that we're going to be able to obtain and focus more on cybersecurity.
You make a great point about the big data piece, because that's really takes us down the path of, okay, so if traditional data security are those practices that we've been doing for the last 20 years, is big data changing the way we do those quote-unquote typical traditional data security practices?
Absolutely. So what we had in the past, for example, just collecting log data, you'd only be able to collect for a few days. We had to throw it away after that, because it was too expensive to collect this log data over a large period of times. Now, with big data, we can collect years or worth of data, so you don't have to throw away all of your data, and you're able to analyze, especially with these advanced persistent threats, where they're actually over multiple period of months, it's slowly infiltrating.
And I think that's a great point, because one of the things that I had a conversation with DHS just recently about kind of do's and don'ts when you get hacked, and too many times one of the big don'ts is don't throw away your log data. Don't overwrite it. If you realize you have a problem, take that log data, put it somewhere else, and then begin almost anew. And I think that's a realization that federal CIOs, probably private sector CIOs and chief information security officers are just realizing. Are you seeing that realization is happening, or is it something that it's a slow roll in terms of the learning process?
It's starting to happen. It's starting to happen in many different verticals, especially financial sector, healthcare. They really understand these, and it's starting to go into other sectors as well. So in public sector, it's something that there's a lot of collection, but I think the incident response mechanisms of basically when this happens, how do you collect it, where do you go look for it within your big data platform, we're starting to see that come around.
And the other piece, I think, of this is it a policy change mostly, or is it a habit? Meaning, for so long, we've been doing it this way. 2 months we erase. 2 months we erase. Now I got to hold it for 3, 4, 5, 6 months, or even just never erase it. And once a year I erase it, just to make sure that if there is a breach later on, I have all that background.
It's a policy change. I mean, it's based on you should be revisiting quarterly or yearly all of your policies around data security, around cybersecurity, and making the changes based off of what you're seeing and what's available in the technology. So that is something that's going to continually need to be adapted.
It's always the habits that are hardest to change. We can change a policy, but changing the habits. The other piece of that, talking about habits, is the idea of behavior analytics. And I think this is a very interesting thing to understand how people are behaving and how does that affect your cybersecurity. Talk a little bit about how behavior analytics is playing a bigger role in how organizations are protecting themselves.
Yeah, organizations are starting to see that it's not just the outside threats, it's not just the insider threats, but it's also the threats to compromised credentials. We're seeing a lot with the phishing and spear phishing campaigns trying to take advantage of these compromised credentials, and the only way really to detect that in time is through user behavior type analytics. If someone comes in and he's typically 9 to 5 and only looking at data set A, and now he's suddenly in the middle of the night looking at data set B, that should rate as a flag, and someone say what's going on, or automatically, even better, start to prevent and lock down, say, okay, let's go talk to this person and see if he's actually using it, or was his credentials compromised.
I think that's one of the most exciting things that's happening within, if you will, the data security, the cybersecurity world, is this idea of behavior analytics. Do you think that it's something that is part of the evolution, or has it been really pushed forward by things, again, Edward Snowden, WikiLeaks, OPM leak even?
It's part of the evolution. So I would say we need to take a more pragmatic approach to security. And what we've, if we take an analogy, for example, in something similar in the medical field, basically before you're just focusing on the vaccinations, you're focusing on just the how do you prevent these illnesses and diseases, but then you start to go a little bit more into the other types of diseases that take more time and research. So I think, and that requires more collaboration, requires more data, requires a lot more. So I think now we have the tools in place to be able to collect this data, share the data, and be able to look at the broader, bigger problems.
Great place to leave off. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about those real-time analytics. You're listening to our conversation, Cybersecurity Analytics and Big Data, sponsored by Cloudera, on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.